Hello everyone, it's Miss Sarah from the Lucy Robbins Wells Library. I thought it'd be really fun if we tried to do some fun sewing videos together. So for this project, we are going to create some fun felt flowers for spring together. And the project that we're doing today comes from this book. It is called Sewing by Hobby Time and it is written by Jane Marland. And this book is actually available on Hoopla if you would like to check it out yourself or at the library. So let's get started and let's look at what we need to do this project.
All right, to begin with, let's look at the supplies we'll need to create our project. One of the supplies you'll need is your template. So one of the template pieces is a large flower that's about 7 inches, a medium flower, which is about 5 inches, and a small flower, which is about 3 inches. So you're going to use these template pieces so that when you cut, your cuts are a little bit more even and your project will look a bit more consistent on each layer, so every flower petal will look the same. So for my example, I used the large, medium, and small petals. But for yours that I'm going to show you today, I'm going to only use the medium and small petal. When you make one at home, you can use any combination of these petal sizes. And if you would like to use the same ones that I used, I will include in the description some directions on how to find this template. Alright, the next thing you will need is a sewing needle. So for this project, we're going to use a very large sewing needle. So this sewing needle, as you'll notice, it's a little tough to see, but it has a large eye. So that is this circular part right here on the needle. And you want that to have a large eye because it's going to be easier to use our thread, which is called embroidery floss. And we also want to use a larger needle because needles can be very dangerous. If we used a small needle and we had dropped it on the floor, it could be easily lost, stepped on, or even have an animal eat it. And that is extremely dangerous. We need to be very careful with our needles at all time and make sure we leave it in a safe place when we're done using it, okay? Alright, so next we're going to look at the thread we're going to use. So this thread, as I mentioned before, is called embroidery floss. And this is a much thicker thread, which is why we need a needle with a larger eye, because a normal sewing needle that you might use for hand sewing, they can get very tiny, and we are not going to be able to thread this kind of, we aren't going to be able to use this kind of thread with this kind of needle, which is why we want a needle that has a much larger eye. See how those would work together better? Okay. Plus, we want to use embroidery floss versus something like sewing machine thread, because this thread is very thin, and if we use this on our project, we won't be able to see our decorative stitches. That thread is better if we're going to be doing something where we just want it to hold together, but in this case, since we want to be able to see all our stitching, we're going to use a thicker thread like embroidery floss. Alright. We will also need to use a button for this project. The button is what is going to hold our project together in the end. So for this project, I am going to show you guys how to use a button that has 2 button holes. Alright. You will also need some chalk or a pencil. So this pencil and chalk are going to be for marking our patterns on our fabric. That way when we cut, we know where to cut. And when we go to cut, we are going to want to use scissors. So I mark my scissors because I get very confused. Since I have 2 types of scissors, I have scissors that are just for fabric and just for paper. And since I often forget which is which, I always write fabric or paper on them. And the reason I use separate scissors for fabric and paper is because once I use these scissors, these fabric scissors, to cut paper, they won't be as sharp anymore, and they won't be able to cut fabric as well. So having separate scissors for fabric is a much better way to work when you are sewing. But if you don't have separate scissors for this project, it should be okay. Alright? The last thing you will need is a piece of felt. So the reason we're going to use felt is because it is a nice fabric that is tough and strong and durable, and the edges will not fray over time. And what I mean when I say fray is that the threads of the fabric will start to unravel with most cotton fabrics. And if that happens, our project could start to fall apart after some use, after being lying around for a while. And that's kind of disappointing when you worked hard on something and it starts to fall apart. So the reason we're going to use felt is because it will not fall apart on us. We'll be able to have this project for a long time, and it will look a bit more professional. Alright, let's get started. To get started with our project, we're going to want to trace and cut out our fabrics. So I already went ahead and pre-traced my fabric. So So I'll look at this one first. So as you can see, I use chalk to trace because I find chalk a little easier, because once you're done, if you had any leftover markings, chalk can just be rubbed right off, whereas a pencil is a little bit harder to erase. So if you have chalk, I recommend it, but it can also be a little bit hard to see chalk on light colored fabrics. So that's why a pencil can sometimes be more helpful. So as you see, I just traced my small pattern on the orange. And on the pink, I traced my medium-sized pattern. Alright, so the next step is to cut them out. So again, we're going to need to be very safe when we use scissors to cut things out, because scissors can be very sharp and dangerous. So remember to have a parent's permission before you cut anything out of fabric. Alright, I'm going to cut out my fabric first. So to make it a little easier to work such a large piece, I'm going to go ahead and just trim around. So now my piece is on a little bit of a smaller size. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these out for you guys, okay? Alright, so now I have both of my pieces cut out. So I have my medium-sized flower in pink and my small-sized flower in orange. And in the end, I'm going to be able to put these both together using my button. But first, it's a little plain, so I think we need to do some of our decorative stitching. So now that we have our pieces cut out, let's learn how to thread our needles so that we're ready to stitch. Alright, so you can use whatever color thread you would like for this project. It's up to you. So let's get started on that part. So for our next step, we're going to need to thread our needle. So you're going to need your embroidery floss again, as well as your sewing needle, which can be kind of tricky to pick up sometimes. Alright, so we have our embroidery floss and our needle. So first we're going to want to pull some of our thread loose. So I've already started pulling a long string. So I'm going to pull it a little bit longer. And it can be a little tricky. Sometimes I don't want to unravel for you. Just get a nice long string of thread going. Once you feel like you've gotten a long enough string, take your scissors and just cut off the end so it's separated from the rest. Alright, so now I have a large bit of string and my sewing needle. So take your sewing needle and take one end of your string. So find your end. Sometimes it gets lost. It's hiding. Alright, so now we need to take our thread and we need to thread it through the eye of our needle. And as you can see, this can be a bit tricky. So one tip I have is sometimes you just need to wet the end of your string and it just gets it a little tighter. And to do that, you just want to use your mouth. It's a little gross, but it works. Okay, so now find your eye of your needle and just try to get your thread to go through it. And once you see it's gone through just a little bit, just like that, grab hold of the other end and pull. And sometimes it gets stuck to your hand. Very good. All right, now you're going to take your thread and you want to make sure it's even on both ends. So I'm going to pull both ends until I find them matching. Match up your ends. One of them got too far. Very good. Alright, so my two ends are now about the same length, and that's good because we want our thread to be nice and even all the way through our needle. So it's kind of a long piece, right? But it's better sometimes to have it a little longer because that way we know we'll make it around our whole project. But if we didn't make it around our whole project, maybe you underestimated, that's okay because we can always start again. So now we need to make this into a knot, because if we don't have this as a knot, the second we push it through our project, it's just going to come flying back out the other end. And that won't help us too much. So what I usually do is I take one finger and I wrap my thread just around it so it comes off. And you'll notice we made a loop. And then take your two bunny ears and pull those through the loop. Squeeze them tight. and you've made a knot, and that can be a little tough to see. So let me see if I can get that to focus just a little better for you guys. A little more. Doesn't want to show you. Oh, there it goes. Alright, so you've made a knot, and now you've got it. And you have a little bit of extra at the end, and that's called your tail. But just in case you didn't get it, we'll do it one more time. So you really only need to knot it once, but just for an example, I'll knot mine twice. So take your finger, wrap it around so it makes a little bit of a loop. Alright, now you can pull that loop off. See how it's twisted like that? You have a loop. Take your two loose ends. Okay. Pull those through your loop. And you see how you have the beginning of a knot? Now you just want to slowly tighten it. Tighten, 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 tighten by pulling on both sides. And you have made your knot. And now when you go to sew, your thread is attached to your needle. It's not going to fall off. And when you push it through the project, your knot will get stuck on the other side. So your thread won't come out, which is what you're looking for. You'll notice that at the end of your thread, there's a little bit of extra, right? Right at the end of your knot. So this little bit at the end is called a tail. And you don't need the tail when you're sewing. So you can actually just take your scissors, be very careful again, and just cut right up until your knot, but don't cut past it. And now at the end, you don't have a big long tail. It's nice and short, and you are ready to get started. So let's look at our project, and let's grab, let's see, I'm using the medium and the small. So in this case, let's grab our medium petal, okay? Let's take a look again at what we're trying to make. So we're going to try to make our decorative flower. So around the edges of my flower, I did some decorative stitching. And this kind of stitch I did is called a running stitch. It's just a basic stitch that is going to kind of run, hence the name, around the edge of our flower. And this will make it look really nice, pretty, and decorative. And for my sample, I used purple and white, yellow and blue, and purple and white again. For the one that we're going to make together, I have my pink for my first layer. And I chose blue for my thread because I thought that would look really fun. And to get myself started and to help myself have a guide of where to bring my needle up and down, we're going to look kind of close. It's a little tough to see, but I actually drew on my flower. I put some little pencil marks all along the way. So that way I had a little bit of a guide just to get started on where I need to bring my needle up and where I want to push it back down. So I didn't mark mine all the way across, but if you would like to mark yours all the way around, put little dots where you think your needle's going to need to go up and down, and just space them out just a little bit, like I did. Just put a little bit of space between each dot, and that will act as your sewing guide, which can be very helpful when you're just beginning. But because this flower is just decoration, our stitches aren't holding anything together, so they can be as spread out or as close as we want them to be. Alright. Struggle to pick up our needle. Alright, once we have our needle in hand, we need to decide which side of our flower is going to be the front and which side of our flower will be the back. Because I've already marked one side of my flower, I'm going to decide that this side of my flower is the front. And because we're using felt fabric, the front and back of our flower are identical. So it doesn't make a big difference which side you pick. You just need to decide one. And to begin with, we're going to actually push our needle up from the back. So, you see how we've already marked our spot? Kind of find the back of your needle and kind of push your needle up into that spot. And it should go through your felt very nice and easily, and then you're going to pull it. Pull it all the way out until you hit the knot. So remember how I made mine kind of long? It took a while to pull it out. But you see how the knot on the back, it got caught. So when I tried to pull it, and I'm tugging on it, my thread's not going to come back out the other end, which is what we were looking for. We don't want our thread to fall out, otherwise all our stitching really won't be for anything if we fall out right away. So, remember, you're going to push from the back. Wherever you marked your first dot, pull it all the way out till you get nice and taut. And your knot is against the back of your project. Make sure it's nice and snug against the back. And that is how you're going to get started. Now your thread is on this half of the project. Now it's facing the front. So we need to make our first stitch. We need to finish our stitch. So you'll see I marked my next dot where I want my needle to go back inside the fabric, and now I want it to head towards the back. So, just like we did before, but now from the front, we're going to go to our dot we marked, and we are going to push our needle through. See how it came through the other side? And then we're going to pull it. And pull it all the way. You can take your time, no rush. And you'll see that we made our very first stitch. See how it looks on the back and on the front? On the front you can see our stitch, and on the back it might look a little different. On the back eventually you'll start to see some stitching too. But the back will see all of our knots as well. So that's why we consider that side the back and this side the front, which is much more decorative. All right. So we have made our very first stitch. So now our needle is again, our thread is facing again on this side. So we need to bring our needle like once again through the back. So look at the front of your fabric. See where you marked your next dot. I put mine right about here. Might be a little tough to pick up on the camera, so make sure you mark your dots nice and clear. Okay, so I'm going to find my dot, and if I miss it a little bit, that's okay. Pull my needle through that dot and pull until it gets nice and snug. Now I'm going to show you something that could happen while you're working on this. Maybe you were pulling, and you pull it really, really tight like that. Uh-oh. I don't see my stitches anymore. What just happened? That's a problem we might face. So if that happens and we pulled it a little too tight, just kind of pull around the edges of your fabric and loosen it up. We don't want to pull so tight like I just showed. Like if I pull too tight, everything's going to kind of disappear and our fabric's going to bunch up. So we don't want to make our stitches too tight. We just want to make sure they're nice and snug, just enough so that we see the stitches, but not so tight that we make our fabric bunch up. And if it does bunch up, like I said, just pull out the edges of it, and that will loosen it up. All right, are you ready to make your next stitch? So, find your next dot, push your needle through, and pull until just snug enough. And now we have two really cool looking dots, and we have two really cool looking stitches. Not dots. So we have made our first two stitches. So let's check out that back again. You see what I mean on the back? We will start to see our stitches as we're sewing along. So I left a nice gap between my stitches because I don't want them to be too tight on this project. I want mine to look a little spaced out. But if you decide you want yours tighter than what I've done, that's great. It's up to you. So let's get to work and let's do our next one. So I made my next one start on my next petal. So I put my stitch to come up right about here. So I'm going to find my dot again, and this time from the back. I'm going to put my needle in to my fabric, and I'm going to pull until all my thread comes through, and uh-oh, I pulled a little too tight. You see that? I bunched it up again, but that's okay, remember? Just going to pull it loose. And now it's better. All right. So I've done my dot. I put another one about here. And maybe I changed my mind. Maybe I think that's too far away now. I don't want my stitch that far away. That's okay, because the dots are just there as a guideline. They're not something you have to follow. So maybe I wanted to put my needle back in right here. So that's what I'll do. And I'm going to take my time, and I'm just going to pull my thread through. And now I have 3 stitches. So I'll do one more together, and then I'm going to finish going around my project. And if you need to go back and watch how I did this one more time, feel free to rewind the video, try this a few times yourself. And if you're not quite confident enough to start on your project, maybe you could just practice stitches on a piece of paper, a styrofoam plate. You can draw a picture on it, and you can practice your stitching there, or even an extra piece of felt that you haven't cut out yet. All right? So our thread is on the back of our project, so we need to push our needle up from the back again. So I'll go with this dot right here as my guideline. Whoops, I dropped my needle. All right, so push through that dot, grab your needle from the other end, and carefully pull through. And if you got too snug and it started to bunch, that's okay. Remember, just loosen it up. Find a place on this side of the fabric. I didn't have any more dots drawn, so I'm just going to put it right here because I think that looks good. And I'm going to pull it through. one more time. Nice and slow. No rush. And there we go. We have done 4 stitches together. And you might notice on this side, hello, who's that peeking out? That's part of my tail. And if that bothers you, you can cut your tail a little bit closer to that knot, just so you won't see that peeking out. Or you could just tuck it inside. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch around the rest of my project. And I want you guys to try to do the same. So if you need to use dots as a mark, like I said, feel free to mark your project, okay? So let's get to work. As you can see, I have just about finished going around my flower. I just have about maybe 1 more stitch or maybe 2 left. So let's do those last 2 stitches together. So I'm going to go back up through the back and down, back through the front, loosen it up if it got too tight, back through the front, back through the back, and then one last time through the front of the fabric. And at that point, I think I am satisfied. I have gone all the way around my flower, and I am ready to finish this off. So I have to cut my thread free from my needle at this point. So you'll see on the back that I brought mine up right before my knot that I started, so I've made it all the way around. So first things first, we are going to want to cut our thread free from our needle, and we're going to want to cut towards our needle. So at the end of our thread that is closest to our needle, we'll cut that off. Then we can put our needle aside, remember, leave it somewhere nice and safe. And you'll see we still have a long bit of thread still attached to our flower. And to make sure our threads and all the stitches that we've just done don't unravel, we're going to want to tie another knot. So this knot is going to be what finishes our stitches off. This might be a little tricky for me to do in front of the camera, but I will do my best to show you. So even just doing a knot like you would do if you were tying your shoes. Okay. Tie your knot. Give it a good tug. Tug, tug, tug. Loosen it all up if you pulled a little too tight when you were tugging. Loose, loose, loose. And that's pretty good. And I'm going to tie my knot one more time just to make sure it doesn't come off. And that when I cut off all this extra string, nothing's going to fall out of my project. So I'll tie one more basic knot. And I'm sorry if it's a little wobbly, I'm trying to keep this in front of the camera. Nice and tight. Squeeze it tight. Alright, so now I'm ready to cut off all of my extra string. So, grab your string, grab your scissors, and then just cut right next to your knot, nice and close to your fabric, but not actually cutting your fabric or your knot. And then you can put that extra bit of thread in the trash. And there you have it. You have done your first layer of your flower. And if this was enough for you and you're ready to stop, at this point you can go ahead and work on your button and put your center of your flower on. But if you would like to add another layer to your flower, you're going to do the exact same thing. So in this case, I'm going to do it on my small orange flower so that I can put these two together. Whoopsie. Oh dear, I lost my button. Well, I'll find my button in a moment. But in the end, what I'll do, oh, I found it! I'm going to take these flowers, put them together, and then I'll attach them with my button. So what I need to do now is put my pink petal aside, that's all done, and do the exact same thing I did with my pink petal to my orange petal. Except for this time, I think I'll use a different color thread, just to switch it up. This time, I'm going to use that green thread I showed you before. I think that would look fun with the orange. So, you're going to follow the exact same steps we did before. You're going to start by grabbing a little bit of your thread, pulling it free. Make a nice long string so you have a good amount of thread. You don't need as much for the small flower because it's much smaller than the medium-sized flower. Cut it free. Put your extra thread aside. grab your sewing needle. If it still has some blue thread, you can just take that off. Take the one end of your thread. Get a little wet if you need to. And then go ahead and put that through the eye of your needle. And that's going to be a little tricky sometimes, but once you got it, just pull it through, make it even on both sides, tie your knot, and following the exact same steps that we did for the first petal, we're going to do that one more time on our small petal. So I'm going to go ahead and just sew my small petal. And if you need to review the steps, just go back to the video, review how we did the pink petal, and do that whole process one more time for your orange petal, okay? So I'll meet you back here once I'm all done, and you're done too. So I went ahead and I finished up my orange petal. So I did all my stitches around it, just like I did for the pink. So now my two petals are all decorated and they are ready to be attached together. So it is at this point that we need to find our button. So like I said before, I'm going to use a button that has two little holes in it. So a 2 buttonhole button. And we're going to put our button on the center of our project. And we're going to use that to sandwich our flower petals together. So just because I've already shown you this step a few times, I've already went ahead and I threaded my needle so it is ready to go. You do not need a lot of thread at this point because our button's not going to make that much thread, so just a little bit of thread on our needle. Go ahead and line your two petals up how you like them. So I put them together like this so they match up. All the petals are kind of in the same spot. Take your button, put it in the center of your smallest petal, so whatever petal size that happens to be. And then from the back, we're going to go from the back of our largest petal. And if it's a little bit easier to do this, you might want to just get your stitch started and then put your button on your stitch. So try to match up with the center. Sometimes it's easier to go from the front. You can just poke it through. Hello. If that doesn't look like it's centered to you, that's okay. This felt is very forgiving, so we can do it more than one time. Just watch for your fingers. I think that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do before I pull my needle all the way out is I'm just going to slide my needle on my button through my needle, just through that one little hole. And then I'll pull my needle the rest of the way out. And this can get a little snug, especially if your needle's kind of tiny, since we're using such a large, in case your button's kind of tiny. Because we are going to use a large needle, we're not going to be able to go through our button very many times. So maybe just only once or twice, just to attach the button. And this can be a little bit tight at this point, like I said, because the buttonholes are so tiny and our thread and our needle are so much larger. So once or twice is good. So once we've gone through, we've pulled it nice and tight, our button's kind of just dangling on our thread right now. It's roughly attached where we want it. Keep one finger on your button just to kind of hold it in place. Now we need to bring our thread back through, and we want to go through the other buttonhole, so the one that doesn't have any thread sticking through it. So from the front, line up your needle with the buttonhole, watch for your fingers, and then push it through. And you'll notice if you flip it over from the back that we can pull our needle out, right? So we don't need to look at the front, just look at the back and pull. You might get little loopies like this in the back. That's okay, because our back's not as important. And look at that. You have attached your button. And at this point, if you're like, maybe I messed up, I would like to try this again. We haven't finished our thread, so we could easily just pull our button off, but I think I'm pretty happy with how that looks. And because our needles and thread is so tight, we really only need to go through our button one time. Because if we tried to bring our needle back through from the other side, we tried to find our buttonhole, this is going to be really hard to push through. If you can manage to get it through one more time, which with a little bit of force you might be able to, your button will be much stronger. But just going through it one time will be more than enough for this project to hold our 2 petals or 3 petals together. So I managed to get mine through twice. And like I said, if that's something you're capable of doing, if your buttonholes are large enough, then that's great. Especially if you're using a larger button than I'm using a pretty small button. You're going to want to go through a few times. So just going up from the back, through that first hole, and then back through the front, through the second hole. And just repeat, up, in, up, in, up, in, until you have a nice snug button. And you can see if from a little bit of a tug, these are not going anywhere. But we need to finish tying off our thread. So just like before, Snip your thread nice and close to the end of the needle. Now that it's all cut, put your needle in a safe place and your scissors in a safe place. Take your little bit of thread from the back. Go ahead and tie your knot. Remember, any kind of knot works here, so like a knot you would do to tie your shoes in the morning. That is the perfect kind of knot. You might want to do it twice, like a double knot. Nice and tight. Do it one more time so it's nice and secure. Tie your shoe, tie your knot. Nice and tight. Then take those scissors, trim nice and close to your flower. Take your extra thread, you can put that in the trash. And voila! You've done it! You have made your own decorative flower. And it looks so cute. You guys did a great job. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you were able to follow along. If you have any more questions, or if you even try this at home, definitely let us know. We'd love to see your projects, okay? Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed. Bye-bye!